Sometimes God has to break the rhythm of your relationships to realign the rhythm of your purpose. When you reach a certain season in life, especially after 50, something begins to shift in the spirit. The people who once surrounded you, the ones you thought would be part of your story forever, suddenly start to fade from your daily life. It feels confusing, even painful, because you've built history with them. You've shared laughter, tears, birthdays, and battles. But one day it's as if God quietly closes the door and says, "This chapter is complete." And you stand there wondering why. But here's the truth: divine separation isn't rejection. It's redirection. God never removes without reason. He doesn't subtract to leave you empty. He subtracts to make room for what's next. The problem is, we often mistake his pruning for punishment. We think something's wrong with us, or that people turned their backs because we failed them somehow. Yet, in reality, God was protecting you from the very thing that could have delayed your destiny. When you've walked through half a century of life, you start realizing how much of your energy has gone into maintaining connections that no longer carry meaning. You kept people around because of comfort, not purpose. Familiarity is a strong chain. It ties you to places you've already outgrown. And God loves you too much to let you stay in a place that's too small for what he's about to do. So he starts removing what doesn't serve the next version of you. Sometimes he'll make the conversations feel off. You'll start noticing how the laughter doesn't heal you anymore, how the gossip drains you, how the constant complaining becomes noise in your spirit. That's not coincidence. That's God detaching your soul from what no longer feeds it, because when he's getting ready to elevate you, he can't have you anchored to people who still operate from your past. See, there's a version of you they were comfortable with, the version that tolerated their inconsistencies, that carried their burdens, that made excuses for their absence. But now you've grown wiser. You've seen too much. You've cried too long. And God says, enough. He pulls you away not to punish you, but to purify your environment. He's creating space for voices that will speak life into you, not drain the life out of you. The hard part is separation doesn't always come with explanation. People won't always exit peacefully. Sometimes they'll misunderstand your silence. They'll call it pride or distance or attitude. But God doesn't need you to defend what he's doing. He just needs you to trust that every departure is divine design. Because what you lose in company, you gain in clarity. You see, purpose and crowd don't always coexist. When God is preparing you for something sacred, he quiets your surroundings so he can speak clearly. The noise of too many opinions can drown out his whisper. And after 50, he knows you've spent enough years trying to please people who were never meant to understand your calling in the first place. So he simplifies your circle. He brings you into alignment with peace. This isn't the time to chase who left. It's the time to recognize what's growing. There's a difference between loneliness and divine isolation. Loneliness says you've been abandoned. Divine isolation says you're being refined. God's not removing you from people to leave you empty. He's removing you to fill you differently. He wants to show you how to walk with purpose, not popularity. When you look back, you'll realize that some of those losses were actually answers to prayers you forgot you prayed. Remember when you asked God to give you peace, to reveal who was real, to show you who had your back for the right reasons. Well, he did. You just didn't expect the answer to come in the form of distance. He answered by revealing what couldn't stay. So when people start falling away, when the calls stop, when the invitations slow down, don't fight it. Don't chase the connections that God himself untangled. Trust that he's creating a divine gap for a divine filling, because everything that's meant for your next season will recognize you in this season. You won't have to chase alignment. It will meet you where you are. God's separation is not subtraction. It's preparation. He's not taking people from you. He's taking you higher. And not everyone can breathe at the altitude he's calling you to. Let them go. Let him lead. Because when God pulls you away, it's never to leave you behind. It's to set you apart for something greater. There comes a time in your life when the silence becomes louder than the noise ever was, when you start to feel something shifting inside you, not because anything around you has necessarily changed, but because God is rearranging the way you hear him. For so many years, you've been surrounded by chatter, opinions, advice, expectations. Everyone had something to say about your life, your choices, your journey. You were trying to please people, trying to meet standards that were never yours to carry, trying to hold conversations that didn't feed your spirit anymore. And little by little, without even realizing it, their voices started drowning out his. Then, one day, he starts pulling you away, not out of anger, not out of punishment, but out of love, because he knows you can't step into peace while you're still tuned into the noise. He's been whispering to you for years. But the volume of your surroundings was too high. The world's opinions have been so loud that you've started mistaking them for your own thoughts. So God begins to quiet the room. People stop calling. Circles grow smaller. Suddenly, you find yourself alone in spaces that used to be filled with laughter. And though it feels like loss, it's really his mercy. See, God's whisper can compete with the world's noise. He doesn't shout for attention. He speaks in stillness. And after 50, he knows you've been through enough storms to recognize that stillness isn't the absence of movement. It's the presence of him. He's pulling you into a space where you no longer need validation to feel valuable, where your spirit can finally exhale, where you stop trying to explain your peace to people who thrive in chaos. It's in that quiet season where clarity begins to bloom. You start realizing how much of your energy was being poured into conversations that left you empty. You see how much of your time was spent trying to fix what was never your assignment. And you start to hear him again, softly, clearly, deeply. You begin to recognize that his voice doesn't sound like judgment. It sounds like guidance. It doesn't sound like noise. It sounds like truth. When you've spent decades pouring into others, sometimes God pulls you back so you can pour back into yourself. You can't hear his whisper if you're constantly surrounded by people who only speak from your past. They knew the version of you that was always available, always rescuing, always giving. But God is calling you into a season of listening, not reacting. You've already proven yourself in survival. Now he wants to show you what peace sounds like. And peace has a sound, you know, it's quiet but powerful. It's that deep sigh when you finally stop fighting for people to stay. It's that still moment when you wake up and realize you don't need to chase anyone's approval anymore. Peace is the language of divine alignment. It doesn't shout, it doesn't rush, it just is. But sometimes that peace only comes when God takes away what's been distracting you. He'll remove the noise you didn't have the strength to silence. That's why some people disappear without warning, because he knows you would have never let them go on your own. You would have kept trying, kept explaining, kept waiting for change that was never coming. So he does it for you. And though your heart aches, your spirit starts to breathe. In the quiet, you rediscover parts of yourself you had forgotten. The parts that used to dream. The parts that used to pray without fear. The parts that believed you were capable of more than just surviving. That's the beauty of divine isolation. It's not a punishment, it's a reintroduction. God says, I need your full attention because there are things I've been wanting to tell you. There are plans I've been waiting for you to be still enough to hear. When you finally stop resisting the silence, you start understanding that it was never about losing people. It was about gaining perspective. You realize that not everyone was meant to speak into your destiny. Some were meant to teach you lessons. Others were meant to show you limits. And a few were meant to walk away so you could finally walk with him. The most powerful thing about this stage of life is that you stop fearing the quiet. You start craving it. You start protecting it. Because you know that's where your strength gets restored. That's where your wisdom grows. That's where your next assignment is whispered, not shouted. You stop looking for validation in echoes and start trusting the original voice that spoke you into being. So if God is pulling you away from the noise right now, don't fight it. Don't rush to fill the silence. Sit in it. Listen. Because in that quiet, he's rebuilding your confidence, your clarity, and your connection to him. The noise had to go because your spirit was too valuable to be lost in the crowd. Sometimes God has to quiet the world so you can finally hear the sound of your own healing. There's a moment that comes when you realize you no longer fit in the same conversations you used to. It's not that you think you're better than anyone. It's that your spirit has shifted. You sit in rooms where you once laughed effortlessly, and now the laughter feels forced. You listen to the same stories that once entertained you, and now they sound hollow. That's when you know growth has happened. You've outgrown the conversations that kept you small. God has been whispering to your heart, it's time to elevate. And elevation always requires a change in dialogue. When you were younger, you needed connection more than clarity. You wanted to belong, to be seen, to be loved. You accepted spaces that didn't feed you because at least they made you feel included. But somewhere along the way, you started realizing that not every connection is healthy and not every conversation is worthy of your energy. You began noticing that your peace started leaving you after certain people left your presence. You started leaving rooms feeling drained, not full. That wasn't coincidence. That was conviction. God was showing you that the conversations you used to enjoy were never meant to carry your next season. There are some people who only know how to speak to the version of you that needed validation. They don't know how to talk to the version of you that values peace. So when God begins transforming you, he also begins transforming your appetite for connection. The same way your body changes what it can handle with age, your spirit starts rejecting what no longer nourishes it. Gossip becomes toxic. Negativity becomes exhausting. Conversations without growth begin to suffocate you. That's how you know your soul is maturing. After 50, God starts cleansing your circle with purpose. He's not being cruel. He's being kind. Because he knows that your words carry weight now. Your time carries value. You can't afford to keep investing in dialogue that doesn't evolve. You can't keep explaining your peace to people who prefer chaos. You can't keep defending your growth to those who benefit from your silence. There's a certain wisdom that comes with this stage of life, a wisdom that knows not every conversation deserves your voice. You start realizing that small talk can't live in big seasons. The conversations that used to fill time now have to fill purpose. You crave depth. You crave truth. You want to talk about healing, faith, peace, legacy, not just what's trending or who's wrong. You want to speak life and not waste breath. And sometimes that craving isolates you because you're surrounded by people who still find comfort in surface talk, while your soul is searching for substance. And that's okay. Don't shrink to fit the room. When God elevates your mindset, you can't expect everyone to understand your silence. Some people will call you distant because you no longer entertain certain things. Some will say you've changed, and then they'll be right. You have. Growth demands change. Healing demands separation. You can't become who God called you to be if you're still trying to fit into conversations that feed who you used to be. You'll notice that your patience grows shorter for meaningless dialogue. That's not impatience. That's discernment. You're realizing that words are seeds, and you don't have time to plant in unfruitful soil. You start protecting your peace the same way you protect your health. With boundaries, you learn that you can love people from a distance without joining every discussion. You can pray for them without participating in their cycles. You don't have to explain your quiet. Sometimes silence is your most powerful response. There's also beauty in understanding that not everyone is meant to walk with you into deeper conversations. Some are only equipped to meet you where they left you. So when you outgrow their language, it's not rejection. It's revelation. God is showing you who can walk with your next level and who was only assigned to your past chapter. And yes, it hurts when that realization comes because you love those people. You built memories with them. You carried them through storms. But here's the truth, the same God who gave you strength to hold them will give you peace to release them. Sometimes holding on to old conversations keeps you from hearing new instructions. God can't give you a fresh vision if you're still talking about old battles. So let the conversation shift. Let the silence settle. Let your spirit breathe. Because the moment you stop feeding small talk, you start feeding purpose. And purpose has a different vocabulary. It speaks in truth, in faith, in wisdom. It speaks in peace. You've outgrown the conversations that kept you small because you were never meant to stay small. Growth may make you quieter, but it also makes you stronger. You're not losing connection. You're gaining clarity. God changed your conversations because he's changing your direction. There comes a point in life when you stop chasing noise and start craving peace. After 50, something inside of you changes, not because you've given up on life, but because you've finally learned what matters most. You've seen how temporary attention can be, how quickly people can switch sides, how empty validation feels once the excitement fades. And through all of that, you start realizing that peace is far more valuable than popularity. You start choosing silence over arguments, stillness over chaos, and truth over pretending. For so long, you may have been the one who gave, who showed up, who tried to keep everyone happy. You were the bridge between broken people, the peacemaker in the middle of conflict, the one who made sure everyone was okay, even when you weren't. But one day you wake up and realize that trying to keep everyone together was tearing you apart. And that's when God begins to shift your focus. He whispers to your heart. Peace is your new assignment, not people-pleasing, not performance. Peace. See, the world teaches us to chase applause, to measure our worth by who claps for us, who calls our name, who notices our effort. But God teaches something different. He teaches that real strength is found in quiet rooms, in unspoken prayers, in moments when nobody is watching, but you keep showing up anyway. Peace doesn't need an audience. It just needs your surrender. When you reach a certain level of spiritual maturity, you begin to understand that popularity can be loud and lonely at the same time. There are people with crowds around them who still go home to empty hearts. There are people who have hundreds of friends, but no one they can truly trust. And there are people like you who've learned that peace is a better companion than a constant company. At this stage of life, you no longer have the energy to argue just to prove you're right. You'd rather walk away with your dignity than stay and fight for validation. You stop explaining your decisions to people who never took time to understand your pain. You stop defending your peace to those who benefit from your chaos. And that's not arrogance. That's wisdom. That's the kind of wisdom you can only earn after you've lost sleep trying to hold on to people who didn't value your presence. Peace starts to become your priority when you realize how much noise costs. Every time you entertain unnecessary drama, you pay with your energy. Every time you chase approval, you pay with your confidence. Every time you keep quiet about your truth just to make others comfortable, you pay with your peace. And after 50, you start saying, I can't afford that anymore. You start guarding your peace like it's your inheritance. Because it is. And here's the thing, people won't always understand that shift. They'll say you've changed. They'll say you've become distant. They might even accuse you of forgetting them. But what they don't realize is that you're not distancing out of pride. You're protecting your peace out of purpose. You're learning that not everyone can sit with your stillness. Some people thrive in chaos. And when you stop feeding their drama, they'll call your quiet cold. But that's okay. You're not responsible for how they label your healing. You begin to find beauty in solitude. You start taking walks just to listen to your own thoughts again. You enjoy mornings without rushing, evenings without noise. You start praying more and talking less. You discover that peace isn't something you find. It's something you build, decision by decision, boundary by boundary. And every time you choose peace, you're saying yes to your healing. You start valuing your time differently. You no longer spend it explaining what you've already outgrown. You no longer lend it to conversations that go nowhere. You start pouring that time into things that restore you, reading, praying, resting, creating. You start realizing that peace doesn't mean everything around you is perfect. It means you've decided not to be controlled by what's imperfect. There's freedom in that kind of peace, the kind that allows you to walk away without resentment. The kind that lets you forgive without reconnecting. The kind that helps you sit in silence without feeling lonely. Because when you carry peace within, it doesn't matter who stays or who goes, you're still whole. You no longer need to chase validation when you already carry divine affirmation. You stop asking for permission to rest. You stop apologizing for choosing yourself. You stop feeling guilty for saying no. Because peace is not selfish, it's sacred. It's the space where your spirit meets God without interruption. So if you've noticed your circle getting smaller, your phone ringing less, your calendar freeing up, don't panic. That's not emptiness. That's alignment. God is simplifying your surroundings so you can finally breathe. You don't have to fight to be seen anymore. You don't have to prove your worth. You just have to rest in the truth that peace was never the absence of people. It was the presence of Him. Peace is the reward for every battle you stopped fighting just to prove you were enough. There's a difference between walking alone and being lonely. For most of your life, you might have thought the two were the same. You believed that to be loved meant to always have people around you. Laughter in the room, voices on the phone, plans on the calendar. But when you reach a certain season, God starts teaching you that solitude isn't a punishment, it's preparation. He begins to pull you away from the noise, from the routines, from the constant companionship. And suddenly, you find yourself spending more time with silence. That's when the real lesson begins. He's teaching you to walk alone, but never lonely. It can feel strange at first. For years, you've been the dependable one. The friend who always answered the late night calls. The one who showed up when everyone else disappeared. You've been surrounded by people who needed you, and in return, you built your sense of purpose around being needed. But then something shifts. The calls slow down. The invitations stop coming. The same people who used to depend on you start drifting away. And you sit there wondering, what did I do wrong? But what if you didn't do anything wrong? What if God just decided it was time for you to learn how to walk without holding hands? Sometimes God has to separate you so He can strengthen you. You've spent so much of your life pouring out, giving, and carrying others that you forgot what it felt like to stand on your own. You became so used to being everyone's anchor that you forgot you had your own current to follow. So He steps in and starts detaching you from what once defined you. Not to hurt you, but to help you rediscover your balance. He wants you to know that you can walk without depending on applause, approval, or attention. You can walk in purpose without a crowd. You can walk in strength without someone holding you up. And it's not an easy transition. There will be nights when the silence feels heavy. There will be days when you look at your phone and realize no one's checking in. Those moments will test your heart. But that's when you remember, God didn't promise constant company. He promised constant presence. You may not be surrounded by people, but you're surrounded by purpose. And that's enough. You start realizing that loneliness and solitude speak two different languages. Loneliness says, I've been forgotten. Solitude says, I've been chosen. Loneliness looks for someone to fill the silence. Solitude listens for what God is saying in it. When He removes the crowd, He's making space for you to hear His whisper. Because sometimes you can't see who you are when you're always reflected in other people's opinions. You can't recognize your own strength when you're always busy holding someone else up. In that quiet season, something powerful happens. You begin to rediscover yourself. You start seeing the person behind the roles. The one who's not just a parent, not just a friend, not just a provider or supporter, but a soul who has dreams, feelings, and worth outside of what they give. You realize that the same God who carried you through every heartbreak, every disappointment, every storm has been walking beside you all along. He didn't remove people from your life to leave you isolated. He did it to walk closer with you. You begin to find beauty in doing things by yourself. You enjoy the stillness of mornings. You learn to take yourself out for coffee without feeling awkward. You stop waiting for company to enjoy your own presence. You start realizing that independence doesn't mean disconnection. It means discovery. You discover that you can hold joy without an audience. You can experience peace without anyone validating it. You can celebrate yourself without needing a crowd to clap. And somewhere in that process, process, you start feeling lighter. The anxiety of needing to be needed starts to fade. You stop checking who stayed and who left. You stop counting who didn't show up. You start thanking God for the few who did. And for the first time in a long time, you breathe freely. Because walking alone doesn't mean you're abandoned. It means you're anointed for a new level of peace. When God teaches you to walk alone, He's preparing you for seasons that require your full focus. You can't carry everyone into every promise. Some assignments are meant for your feet only, and while others might not understand why you've become quieter or more withdrawn, you know it's because you're finally hearing God clearly. You've stopped asking for directions from people who've never been where you're going. You're walking in sync with the one who charted your path long before you knew how to walk it. You start to understand that divine strength is built in solitude. That confidence doesn't come from applause. It comes from assurance, the assurance that even when it feels like no one's walking beside you, you're never walking alone. You realize that loneliness fades the moment you recognize that His presence fills every empty space. So don't fear the season of walking alone. Don't rush to fill it with people, with plans, with noise. Let it teach you. Let it rebuild you. Because when God removes the crowd, it's not to leave you empty. It's to remind you that His presence has always been enough. You're walking alone, but never lonely, because God never leaves the ones He's leading. There comes a sacred moment in life when you stop chasing who you used to be and start embracing who you've become. Around this stage, after 50, something within you begins to shift. You stop asking, what do they think of me? And start asking, what does God see in me? It's not about reinvention, it's about reintroduction. Because after decades of carrying responsibilities, expectations, heartbreaks, and victories, God starts peeling back the layers the world placed on you. He starts revealing the version of you that He always saw, the one unshaken by titles, untouched by opinions, unafraid to just be. You've spent years living through seasons that shaped you, sometimes in ways you didn't even recognize. You were the caretaker, the problem solver, the peacekeeper, the strong one. You've worn so many labels that somewhere along the way, your own reflection got buried under them. You looked in the mirror and saw roles, not identity. You saw survival, not self. And God said, it's time you see you the way I do. When God reintroduces you to yourself, it's not a loud process. It's gentle. It happens in the quiet moments when you no longer feel the need to prove anything. It happens when you stop apologizing for your boundaries. It happens when you stop explaining your silence. That's when you realize He's been redefining you from the inside out. He's not making you someone new. He's restoring who you've always been beneath the scars and the expectations. There's something powerful about reaching a point where you finally know your worth without needing anyone to confirm it. You've been through enough heartbreak to know what love isn't. You've walked through enough storms to know that peace isn't found in people. It's found in God. You've experienced enough disappointment to know that closure doesn't always come from others. Sometimes it comes from acceptance. And through it all, you've become softer and stronger at the same time. You start noticing how your reflection looks different, not because your face changed, but because your spirit did. You see the lines of wisdom, the evidence of battles survived, the quiet confidence of a woman who's been refined by grace. You stop wishing for your old self back because you finally understand that version of you didn't know what this peace feels like. That version of you didn't know how to say no without guilt. That version of you didn't know how to rest without feeling lazy. But this you does. This you has walked through fire and come out glowing. When God reintroduces you to yourself, He also redefines your relationships. You start noticing that the connections that once filled your time no longer fill your soul. You start seeing who loves you for who you are, not for what you give. You learn to cherish quality over quantity, depth over drama, truth over titles. And in that process, you realize that being seen by fewer people doesn't mean you're less valuable. It means you're finally visible to the right ones. You also begin to forgive yourself differently. You stop carrying the weight of every mistake like a punishment and start seeing it as part of your process. You recognize that the woman you were at 25 did the best she could with what she knew. The woman you were at 40 fought battles no one saw. And the woman you are now, she's learned that grace isn't something you earn. It's something you accept. That realization sets you free from the pressure of perfection. There's something liberating about looking at your reflection and finally saying, I'm proud of her, not because she's flawless, but because she's faithful. Because even when life broke her heart, she didn't let it harden her spirit. Because even when people left, she didn't stop believing in love. Because even when her path got dark, she kept walking toward the light. That's what reintroduction looks like. Not a new version of you, but a truer one. And as you walk in that truth, you start carrying yourself differently. You no longer enter rooms hoping to be accepted. You enter knowing you belong. You stop chasing validation and start attracting peace. You don't compete, you create. You don't perform, you exist. You don't beg for space, you build it. That's the kind of power that comes when you finally see yourself through God's eyes. Because when he looks at you, he doesn't see your failures, your insecurities, or your flaws. He sees purpose. He sees resilience. He sees a vessel refined by experience and filled with grace. He sees someone who has been through the wilderness, but still chooses to bloom. So when you feel yourself changing, don't fight it. You're not losing yourself. You're meeting yourself again. The version that's free from comparison, free from guilt, free from pretending. The version that walks with quiet confidence because she knows who she is and whose she is.